It was my fifth day living in Gloman, Nevada, an unincorporated town surrounded on all sides by scorched wasteland. I had never been this far west before, and so the acacia-dotted desert dazzled my senses. I remember wishing I could extend my stay here, but at the same time I knew it was impossible. My business in the city was completed and the presentation went well. On Monday, I was expected at the home office. Instead of staying in a hotel, I checked in with two old friends who had moved to the area after graduation. Jason and Clara were old sweethearts who had eventually married and moved west to, as they often put it, live free and without outside guidance. They gladly sheltered me for a week, and I enjoyed socializing with them, even if they had become hallucinogen-based desert spiritualists. I was afraid to try mescaline, and I was especially scared to experiment with psychedelics so far from the relatively livable streets and services of Gloman. Nevertheless, Clara confidently assured me that the experience would not only be safe, but beautiful. When we get there, in the silent desert air, she told me, and the peyote kicks in, and there's no movement but us and the fire, and all under a billion sparkling stars. She fumbled for words, but instead could only smile serenely. You'll see what I mean. I agreed to join them on one of their trips before returning home. That night, as we prepared for the trip together, Jason pulled a glass jar with a tin screw cap out of the closet and held it out to me. Inside were about 200 small, clear gelatin capsules. Jason removed the tin lid and dropped some of the strange pills into his palm for me to look at. I saw that each capsule was packed with shredded pieces of something fibrous and forest-colored. It reminded me of tree bark. When everything was ready, the three of us hit the road. Jason drove and Clara guided him out of town, then over dozens of miles of dirt roads. Eventually, we ended up on a completely off-road road, and I could feel the rocks and small boulders beneath us jostling the car as we drove. Soon, Clara and Jason decided they were quite happy with the pristine nature of their surroundings, and Jason parked the car. The two of them set up camp, and I made a makeshift fire. As dusk thickened, Clara lit the fire they'd built, and Jason brought me my dose of peyote and a beer to help me swallow a bunch of capsules. Just eat them one by one, Jason advised. It won't take long. He demonstrated placing the capsule on his tongue, sipping the beer, and then opening his mouth to indicate the pill was gone. Sitting by the fire, I saw that Clara was taking 3 or 4 pills at a time, pausing only to sip from her glass. Soon each of us had taken our dose. We drank, stared at the fire, and waited to see what would happen next. At first we spoke aloud to each other, but soon fell silent. The emptiness of the desert pressed from within with a palpable need for silence, and it made us mute. Eventually I noticed that I had become ravenously attentive to the fire flickering before me. Prismatic streaks of color began to fly out of the flames into the night air, each one cascading like a living speck of sap. I felt dizzy and noticed that Jason and Clara seemed to have fallen into the same state. They were looking up at the stars with smiles and searching eyes. I turned toward the fire again, wanting to lose myself in its blinding movement once more. I began to dissolve into its warmth, but soon noticed a strange feeling within me that something large was moving in the darkness nearby. Shifting my attention to the movement, I saw a human figure standing alone in the desert, only barely illuminated at this distance by the flickering light of a campfire. If it were only a few paces away, I thought to myself, the figure would be completely obscured by the darkness. I see something. I heard myself say it out loud, but my voice sounded strange and foggy. Jason and Clara turned lazily in my direction. Jason said with a peaceful smile, "What do you see, Vince? Describe it for us." I strained my vision, which was already limited by the darkness and now distorted by the peyote. Indeed, even the sand and trees around me seemed to be moving and shifting, and yet the figure was not something abstract. It looked like a large man who marched uncertainly in place, shuffling from foot to foot. He took a step forward, then 2 steps back, then perhaps 4 quick, leisurely steps toward us, then 3 more steps back. All the while he was staring intently in our direction. The figure's torso bounced gently on elastic, rising and falling knees. "I see a man," I began hesitantly. "Or so it seems to me." I twitched nervously, then corrected myself. "I don't think it's a person. The eyes don't blink at all." Indeed, the eyes glowed brightly, like 2 lighted pins against the surrounding darkness. They did not flicker or go out as the figure walked. "Perhaps it's just an owl," Clara suggested, still turning away from the creature. "Do the eyes seem to be snooping around or making shapes in the dark?" "Yes," I replied with a sob in my voice. "But look for yourself, it doesn't look like an owl." Clara propped herself up on one arm and looked over her shoulder to trace my index finger. Her lazy smile suddenly turned into a deep frown, and I felt sick at the look on her face. Jason noticed it too, and turned to look at her with the same sudden loss of relaxation. It seemed the thing was really there. Suddenly, a series of howling, clicking sounds came from the side of the thing. As it continued, the procession of sounds became more and more complex and strange, and soon the noise became like a wicked, shrill battle cry. It seemed to me that the creature was calling out to us on purpose, and the thought made me tense my whole body until I was paralyzed. Clara and Jason began shouting at the form, which was still marching aimlessly, not getting any closer. "Get lost, asshole." Clara's voice sounded fierce, but it was audible that she was afraid. "You'll be sorry you ever messed with us," added Jason, projecting his voice into the desert in the same uncertain tone. But the creature seemed to pay no attention to their threats. Moreover, it began to move forward slowly and purposefully. Soon, it drew close enough to the campfire that I could see it more fully. I wasn't sure, but it seemed to me that with each step the creature contracted its entire body violently. It was as if the creature was fighting some fit of intense fear as it moved, and somehow it was winning the struggle. In my vision and in my mind, both of which were already swimming in peyote fantasies, the creature distorted and twitched like a grotesque and poorly controlled marionette. Swaying unevenly in the sand, unresponsive to our screams and insistent requests to leave, it began clicking and muttering its strange singing sounds again. This time, though, the sounds were more like English. "Give me a break already," shouted Clara, and rose to her feet to face the humanoid creature that was now very close by. "Just get lost," shouted the creature in response, and then added a hiccuping giggle that echoed softly in the night silence. It didn't hesitate to come closer. "Find me the car keys," Jason said quietly to Clara. "I'll scare it away." Taking the keys, Jason quickly retrieved a tire iron from the trunk of the car and then stood by the fire, holding the improvised weapon above his head. "This is your last warning," he shouted. "Don't make us hurt you." He took a few steps toward the creature, as if preparing to attack. To our relief, the creature got to its feet and froze. Clara and I smiled happily, then turned our attention back to Jason. But when we did, we saw that Jason had dropped both his car keys and his gun to the ground. He was now walking, lazily but purposefully, toward the creature, which stood patiently in the darkness nearby. The creature, looking at Jason with its glittering and seemingly lidless eyes, waited patiently for him to join it, and then seemed to lead Jason back into the impenetrable darkness beyond the campfire in a march-like dance. It squatted low and tilted its head forward to look Jason in the face. That's what I saw. It seemed to me that the creature had hypnotized my friend with its unbroken gaze as it retreated into the darkness. Worse, the creature had to bend over, lower its shoulders, and bend its knees before its eyes were level with Jason's. Whatever it was much taller than humans usually were. Clara and I screamed. We were so panicked that we couldn't make out anything but our own pleading sobs for Jason to come back to the fire, please. Please, please, please come back. We howled until we were out of breath, and when we finally stopped, we felt the absolute and complete silence over the desert again. For a minute, the emptiness of the place was broken only by the quiet crackling of the fire. Then came Jason's scream, a scream that came from an impossible distance. He was screaming the way only someone who couldn't believe his pain could scream. I looked at Clara in horror, and she echoed my expression, turning her head to look at me. Just as suddenly as it had begun, Jason's lamentation fell silent, turning into a final sigh that sounded like drowning. I was too stunned to move, but Clara was already on her feet. She picked me up by my shirt and dragged me toward the parked car. Before I realized what was happening, she was pushing me into the back seat and then darting for the car keys Jason had dropped on the ground. She was soon back, sitting in the driver's seat, and despite her badly shaking hands, started the engine. "Which way is the road into town?" she whispered, as if afraid to raise her voice too loudly. "Which side do we come from? Answer me, Vincent." "Just leave," was the only thing I could answer. "Just get us out of here." At that moment, I felt an overwhelming dizziness, as if my spirit was trying to leave my doomed body, and I closed my eyes tightly to regain my bearings. After sitting like that for a while, I realized that Clara was no longer speaking to me. Moreover, she wasn't making any sounds at all. I was so dizzy that I was sure the car had at least moved, but when I opened my eyes, Clara was sitting calmly in the driver's seat of a stationary car. She was silently staring out the window. Following Clara's gaze, I saw that the creature had returned. It was squatting a short distance away from me. The glowing orbs in its eye sockets were pointed at her. It was pulling her away from me. I begged Clara not to leave me alone, as she took the keys out of the ignition and tossed them carelessly on the mat at her feet. She got out of the car and headed toward the creature. I, stumbling, climbed up from the back seat and tried to put my arm around her shoulders. In response, she viciously elbowed me in the gut and left me unconscious. I collapsed onto the car, and when I found the strength to get up again, she and the creature were gone. I tried desperately to put the car in motion, but the combination of mescaline and adrenaline in my system made it difficult to move. The steps involved in starting the engine and transferring motion eluded me, and the lettering on the manual transmission seemed alien, as if I had completely forgotten the Latin alphabet. It didn't help that as I tried to start the car, I could hear Clara's voice, always so pleasant and calm until tonight, now screaming wildly, choking on blood. Clara always sounded like music, pleasant, soft, and wonderful. Now the cold desert air was pervaded by the ragged and wordless sighs of pathetic agony. The silence that eventually came, however, was even worse. It told me that I was all alone. I turned to look out the driver's side window where I sat, having never managed to start the car. I saw that the creature was back, again playfully striding out of the darkness, but this time directly toward me. I felt like I was about to pass out from panic, but mortal fear kept me fighting. Finally, I managed to bring the engine to life, but pressing on the gas only caused the engine to stall. I could feel the creature's gaze on me, and knew it was almost at my window. I turned away from the window as best I could, but in doing so, I depressed the clutch with one foot and grasped the shift lever with the other to move it to a new, but arbitrary position. My vision was too swollen to see exactly what gear I was now in, but I didn't care as long as the car started moving. I turned to face forward and prepared to step on the gas, but suddenly I found myself looking directly into the creature's eyes. It was sitting on the hood of the car, staring at me through the windshield with its electric light bulb-like eyes. I closed my eyes tightly, trying not to succumb to the creature's hypnotic pull. I prepared to die, but a monstrous shriek and the sound of distant footsteps interrupted my fearful thoughts. It seemed to me that the creature had been suddenly attacked and was now fleeing. After standing motionless for a few moments with my eyes closed, I noticed a faint sensation of sunlight on my eyelids. Dawn was breaking over the distant mountains. The creature was gone, and it occurred to me that such a horrible thing could only exist in the darkness of hell. For the first time since the creature had appeared, I felt I could relax. Completely confused, I drew the deepest comfort from the warmth of the sun's rays on my face. I passed out, not realizing how exhausted the night had made me, and slept for several hours. When I awoke, I found that the effects of the peyote were also mostly wearing off. Feeling almost sober now, I immediately went into town to find help for my missing friends. I went to the police and tried to tell them my story in a way that made it seem at least half believable. I confessed to everything I could, knowing full well that it all sounded like the stereotypical bad trip, skeptical and more than a little annoyed. A couple of officers eventually agreed to follow me out into the desert to find out the details of Jason and Clara's disappearance. Together, we found the remains of a campfire and tire tracks in the sand, but there was no sign of my companions. The police also found no signs that a struggle had taken place anywhere nearby. The police soon concluded that the disappearance of my two friends was likely a simple matter of Clara and Jason being surprised by the power of mescaline. They thought they were prepared by their previous experiences. One of them said, already heading for the cruiser to take us back to town. And so they trusted themselves to wander alone at night. Co-hallucinations are pretty common in scenarios like this. The other officer agreed. You were lucky it was your first time. You were too stunned to follow them, so you stayed by the fire. That, and the fact that you sat in the car with the engine running until dawn, probably saved you from freezing. He paused and looked up, as if stopping to feel the sun on his face. We'll do our best to find your friends, but frankly, I'd be surprised if they survived the night. I'm home now, safe and far away from that horrible creature, or at least that's how it seems to me. But I have realized something terrible, and the thought is driving me more and more insane. There's no way I can be completely sure that I'm not still in there, hypnotized, and being led to my death, while the fantasies of escape continue. Let me try to explain it a little better. Every night since I left Nevada, I've had the same dream. Every night. The same horror plays out in my mind in exactly the same way. And it always goes something like this. I'm driving out of Gloaming. It's about noon, just after the police told me, we'll do everything we can to find your friends. I'm glad I'm on my way home. Before I get behind the wheel, I think about calling my mom, but then realize I don't know what I would say if she answered. I'm still shaken and exhausted, so I decide to just increase the distance between me and the city. I press the gas pedal impatiently, but for hours it seems like I can't make any headway. With a creeping unease, I realize that for hours now there hasn't been a single car in sight. Even the signs on the side of the road have disappeared. The space around me resembled an unfinished painting, a striking lack of detail. It doesn't look at all like the road I originally took into town. I don't recognize anything. With a suddenness that tears my heart from top to toe, the steering wheel melts out from under my hands. The car, the road, and even the sun overhead all dissolve in an instant. I find myself in the pristine desert sands, teleporting back into the near-perfect darkness of that eerie night. The creature looms and quacks nearby, looking me straight in the eye. I realize I've been staring into its face for damn near as long as I can remember. The safety of the morning sunrise, the relief that I was able to escape, were all just illusions foisted upon me to occupy my mind while I went to my execution. In this dream, my waking life is a fantasy. I am still there with this creature. The creature howls in a way that makes my ears pop, and I press my hands to my skull, trying to resist the sound. My knees buckle though, and I fall to the ground. The creature is already a few inches away from me, and I can see that it's drawing oxygen into itself from the many chitinous holes that dot its chest and neck. Periodically, they retract inward like gasping mouths, and then relax again. As the creature leans in to engulf me, the sounds it makes become quieter and more distinct. It begins to draw in air more rhythmically and lets out each breath with a low hiss. Ha, ee, ha, ee. When I feel him finally touch me with his hand-like appendages, he chokes on the words, don't you? Ha. Do you miss your friends? With a slobbering, sucking sound, the creature's flat and featureless jaw unfolds into a gaping maw. Chevrons of razor-sharp teeth emerge from fleshy folds all along the inside of the creature's throat, which is now open like a snake's gaping maw, shimmering in the blackness of the night like stars. In this dream, I am still under the influence of peyote, and so I see ghostly emanations of impossible color emanating from the creature's face and form. Shivering hallucinations gather around this creature, as if lesser nightmares are gathering to join it. Ephemeral demons screech through the night air towards me with each greedy spasm on the creature's face. Fractals drip from his eyeless eyes, and I feel myself crying too. In this dream that I have no way of stopping, the sun finally rises over the expanse of the forgotten desert, but I am not alive to meet it.